Hello everybody, my name's Derek Bell and I had the most wonderful 40 years of my life racing cars. It started way back in the late 60s with a little Lotus 7 which was fabulous, and what a way to start club racing in Britain, and then developed into going through Ferrari into Formula One and then sideways straight to Porsche very quickly afterwards, and of course that's when I met this car here. I just signed the contract with Porsche to drive in the 1971 season. They phoned me up and said, come out to Hockenheim, we want you to do some testing for us. I was with this very car here, and this is the first time I've seen it since 1970. This one was very special, and this one actually never raced. It was driven by myself and Joe Sifford, who became my teammate in '71. Phenomenal Swiss driver, a really great friend of mine. So there we are. I get in the car and there's this massive computer on the floor. And as I went down each of the supposed straights at Hockenheim, which are fairly lengthy, but they're both on gradual curves, as I went down there and I saw a white stick on the right-hand side, I'd flick the switch. And when I saw the second white stick, I'd flick the switch again. And that would start and stop the computer. And that way you could find out really the maximum speeds of the car with the various little configurations they were doing on the bodywork. But the highlight probably of the day, probably not so much for me, but the victim, was about 5 minutes to 5, they say, Herr Bell, would you like to do that one again? I said, oh, sure, it's 5 o'clock, surely, the track's going to shut any minute. As I'm coming out in third gear, absolutely flooring it, knowing it was just about all over, suddenly in front of me in the fog, this poor bugger on a cycle, and he's cycling home across the track. It's obviously the shortcut he takes home every night on a footpath, then across the track. He must have had the scare of his life. Anyway, I didn't hit him, fortunately. That's why I'm here today, because I wouldn't be here either. But the fact was I couldn't help, and I've always laughed so much about the fact when he got home, he must have been as white as a sheet. It must have been terrifying, because I missed him and he carried, all I could see was this terrified face. It's no good him trying to pedal harder, but he must have heard it but wondered where the heck it was coming from. So that was my end of my testing that day, but that was welcome to working with Porsche. As far as my career is concerned with Porsche, I know that I was just very lucky to be in the right place at the right time. But the opportunity came to race for Porsche, and it really helped having done the Steve McQueen, or worked on that in 1970, which is when I first drove the cars, standing in for Steve sometimes, and quite often driving the Ferrari and others, because it was the battle between the car I drove and of course Steve, and Steve did drive in his car. So that's how we started, and Joe and I won the first race in Buenos Aires, which was a great start for me to sort of win my first big race for any manufacturer. And then of course we went to Le Mans, and we had that dream time with the long-tailed car, which everybody was always in amazement about the speed that we used to do. We had the test weekend, it's always about 6 weeks before Le Mans. It's 8 miles around, and down one side of it is basically a straight. And it's 4 miles long, this straight. And then it's 4 miles back through the twists and turns, but all very fast corners. And when we turn up there to drive, which is always a bit terrifying, because you know that you're going to be actually driving into the unknown. You're going to be driving a car that has never been this fast before, and you've never been this fast before in that car, because there's nowhere in the world you can test where there's a 4 mile straight. After the sort of day was over, Norbert Singer, the wonderful engineer, probably the greatest engineer in motorsport through his life, this was Norbert's baby. We went to Le Mans, test weekend, and we'd go out, and of course, you'd come in and they'd check how many revs you're pulling here, revs there. And at the end of the weekend, Norbert says to me, so how many revs were you pulling? I said, the best I ever saw was 8,100. He said, oh, that is very good, because at 8.2 she blows up. I went, whoa, didn't know that, they've never heard that one before. Usually a rev limiter would come in. They didn't have rev limiters. So when they over-revved, they blew, end of story. So he says, so how many revs are you pulling? The days before computers, his slide rule comes out, and he starts to laugh. And I said, what are you laughing about? He said, I just calculated your top speed. And I said, well, what was it? He said, I think it's better you don't know. And I said, I think we should know. If Joe and I and Pedro and Jackie have got to drive this thing for 24 hours, it's nice to know how fast you're going down that straight. He said, you were doing 396 kilometers an hour, which is 246 miles an hour. It was just amazing. I mean, lap after lap. Inevitably, we went out in the middle of the night with a cracked cylinder with a bit of oil coming out. And that was the end of that era, so that car was never seen again as a race car. Of course, I've talked about the Mulsanne Straight when it had no chicanes, and that obviously was to take away the chance of incidents of tyres bursting, which there weren't that many, and everybody was going to the limit, but it seemed more sensible that they should do something about that. To me, the track, which was so great and so phenomenal, because of its character, because of that uniqueness of that straight, because putting two chicanes in brought it down to being not as quite as dramatic as it used to be. To sum it all up, here we are reunited with chassis 32, and I suppose at the end of the day it's just amazing to look back. We drove this 50 years ago. We still go out and drive it and we still get such a rush out of it, but it shows you just what the 917 has done for motorsport and mainly for Porsche. So without this car and the history that we had through Porsche, the 956, the 962, right up to today, my career would not have been the same. It means a lot to me.